When presence does not equal understanding, the leopard is already there, not emerging from cover, not entering the scene, simply present, within the frame, within the landscape, within view. Footage from forested regions shows the same pattern repeating. The animal stands or rests in partial openness, its form visible against trees, rock, or uneven ground. Nothing about the scene suggests absence, and yet recognition does not arrive immediately. Viewers hesitate. Observers disagree about distance, posture, even certainty of what they are seeing. This hesitation is not rare. It appears again and again across recordings, encounters, and images. The leopard does not change position. The environment remains stable. What shifts is interpretation. At first, the animal blends into the scene. Then it becomes something noticed but not fully resolved. Only later does it register clearly as a leopard, solid, present, unmistakable. The delay is subtle, often unnoticed, but it is consistent. This is not a story about concealment. It is not a story about strategy or behavior. It is a story about the limits of observation. Seeing is often treated as a reliable endpoint. If something is visible, it is assumed to be understood. But repeated encounters with the same animal challenge this assumption. The leopard remains constant. Yet perception fluctuates. Certainty arrives late, or not at all. What this reveals is not a property of the animal, but a condition of the observer. The gap between presence and understanding is wider than it appears, and within that gap, interpretation falters. To examine this, the leopard will remain our reference point. It will not change, disappear, or perform. What will change is how it is seen, and how incomplete that seeing can be. The first delay, A. Repeated observation. Across multiple recordings, the same pattern appears. A leopard is visible within the frame, positioned against a background of trees, rock, or uneven forest floor. The animal does not move. Its outline is present, its coloring discernible, its form unobstructed by dense cover. Nothing is technically hidden. Yet viewers consistently fail to recognize the animal immediately. When the footage is replayed, observers often point to the same moment and express surprise that the leopard was visible from the beginning. The scene did not change. The animal did not arrive late. The recognition did. This delay occurs even when the leopard occupies a central portion of the image. The frame does not push it to the periphery. It is not obscured by motion blur or distance. Still, the eye moves past it without registering certainty. The leopard remains constant. The observation does not. B. Inconsistent interpretation. Different viewers describe the same frame differently. Some see a shape, others notice pattern without form. Some register movement that never occurs. Others see nothing until the leopard eventually shifts position. Even among trained observers, interpretation varies. One identifies posture, another misjudges distance, a third questions whether the animal is present at all. The disagreement does not arise from lack of visibility, but from uncertainty in resolving what is being seen. The same image produces multiple interpretations, none of which are fully stable at first glance. C. Perceptual constraint. This inconsistency is not random. Human vision prioritizes contrast, motion, and separation. Static forms that share texture, color, or luminance with their surroundings are processed more slowly. The visual system delays classification when cues conflict or remain incomplete. In these scenes, the leopard does not provide the signals the brain expects. There is no motion to trigger attention. Edges blend into background texture. Depth cues are weakened by lighting and terrain. The animal is visible, but not immediately categorized as a distinct object. Perception hesitates because resolution requires effort. D. Reframed understanding. Once this limitation is recognized, the delay becomes predictable. The leopard does not evade sight. It occupies a perceptual threshold where visibility exists without clarity. Recognition is postponed not by concealment, but by the way attention is allocated. The animal does not change, the frame does not change, only interpretation does. This first delay establishes the pattern that will repeat throughout every observation that follows. When shape fails to lock. A. Repeated observation. In repeated footage, the leopard's outline is present, but unstable. Viewers describe seeing fragments rather than a whole, a curve that might be a shoulder, a pattern that could be foliage, a line that suggests a back but never fully resolves into form. The animal occupies space, yet its shape does not immediately lock into recognition. This occurs even when the leopard's coloration contrasts modestly with the background. The issue is not invisibility, it is fragmentation. The eye samples parts of the scene, but the parts do not assemble into a single, confident object. Across different clips, the same moment repeats. The leopard is seen in pieces before it is seen as a whole. B. Inconsistent interpretation. Some observers report recognizing the animal only after mentally tracing its outline. Others require a second viewing. A few insist the leopard was not visible until it moved despite evidence that it was present throughout. Interpretation shifts back and forth. The same shape is alternately dismissed as background and reconsidered as body. This instability produces hesitation rather than certainty. The mind oscillates between possibilities without settling. The leopard remains unchanged. The classification does not. C. Perceptual constraint. Object recognition depends on the brain's ability to bind features, edges, textures, and contrasts into a unified form. When features are present but weakly correlated, binding slows. Low contrast between body and background, combined with complex textures, disrupts this process. Lighting further complicates recognition. When illumination is uneven, internal shading that normally signals curvature is reduced. Without reliable shading gradients, the brain struggles to infer volume. Shape remains ambiguous, even when visible. In these conditions, perception favors caution. It postpones commitment until stronger cues appear. D. Reframed understanding. The failure to lock shape is not an error of sight, but a consequence of conservative processing. The leopard occupies a zone where features exist without sufficient coherence. Recognition is delayed until additional information, often motion, confirms form. Understanding this reframes the experience. The leopard is not hidden. It is incompletely assembled by perception. Visibility is present. Certainty is not. This explains why recognition often arrives suddenly, as if the animal appeared out of nowhere when in fact it was there all along. Depth without distance. A. Repeated observation. In many recordings, viewers can identify the leopard's presence yet remain uncertain about where it exists in space. The animal appears neither clearly near nor far. Its position relative to surrounding trees, rocks, or ground contours feels indeterminate. Observers describe the leopard as flat, pressed into the scene, or hard to place. Even when the background is familiar, this uncertainty persists across different camera angles and environments. The leopard's body is visible, but its distance is not immediately legible. The scene lacks a clear sense of spatial hierarchy. Again, the animal does not change. The spatial reading does. B. Inconsistent interpretation. Some viewers assume the leopard is farther away than it actually is. Others interpret it as closer but partially concealed. A few misjudge its posture entirely. Reading a standing animal as crouched or resting, these conflicting interpretations often coexist within the same viewing session. The observer revises their understanding multiple times without gaining confidence. Distance becomes an assumption rather than a conclusion. C. Perceptual constraint. Depth perception relies on multiple cues: shadow, relative size, overlap, and shading gradients. When these cues are weakened or inconsistent, distance becomes ambiguous. Low-angle lighting reduces internal shadows. Complex terrain disrupts scale references. Similar textures between subject and background blur separation. In such conditions, the visual system cannot reliably anchor the leopard within the scene. The animal occupies the image plane without a stable depth assignment. Perception recognizes presence, but fails to situate it accurately. This ambiguity delays interpretation. Without knowing where the leopard is, the observer hesitates to decide what it is. D. Reframed understanding. The issue is not that depth disappears, but that it becomes unreliable. The leopard remains visible, yet its spatial relationship to the environment is unresolved. Recognition stalls because classification depends on placement as much as form. Understanding this clarifies why observers often react only when the animal moves. Motion restores depth cues instantly, distance snaps into place. What felt flat becomes spatially coherent. Until then, the leopard exists in a perceptual middle ground present, but not fully located. When light undermines certainty, A. Repeated observation. In repeated footage of the same behavioral moments, changes in light, not movement, alter how the leopard is perceived. At one moment, the animal appears distinct. Moments later, under slightly different illumination, it seems less defined. Despite occupying the same position, the background remains constant. The leopard remains still. Only the light shifts. Viewers often report that recognition improves or deteriorates as brightness changes subtly across the scene. The animal does not enter shadow fully, nor does it emerge into clear light. Instead, it exists within a narrow band of illumination, where clarity fluctuates without warning. B. Inconsistent interpretation. Under these conditions, observers disagree not only about what they see, but when they see it. Some identify the leopard earlier in the sequence, others only after the light angle changes. A few insist the animal was not visible until a later moment. Even though frame-by-frame review shows continuous presence, interpretation becomes tied to illumination rather than position or form. The same posture produces different conclusions depending on how light interacts with surface texture at a given moment. C. Perceptual constraint. Human vision relies heavily on light gradients to infer structure. Shading defines curvature, separates planes, and signals depth. When light arrives from low angles or is diffused unevenly, these gradients weaken. Surfaces lose contrast. Edges soften. In forested environments, this effect is amplified. Light is filtered through leaves, branches, and terrain, producing fragmented illumination. The leopard's coat reflects and absorbs light in ways that further reduce internal shading. The result is not darkness, but ambiguity. Under such conditions, the visual system struggles to stabilize interpretation. The animal's form remains visible, but its clarity depends on fleeting alignments of light and surface. D. Reframed understanding. The fluctuation in certainty is not a property of the leopard. It is a consequence of how light structures perception. Recognition improves, not because the animal changes, but because illumination temporarily restores the cues perception relies on. This reframing explains why observers often describe the leopard as appearing or disappearing with the light. In reality, presence is constant. Certainty is conditional. The leopard remains where it is. Light determines how confidently it is seen. Attention without priority. A. Repeated observation. In many sequences, the leopard occupies a clear portion of the frame, while other elements continue to draw attention away from it. Leaves move in the foreground. Light flickers across the ground. Small animals pass briefly through view. The leopard remains still and visible, yet it does not become the focal point. When viewers are asked to describe what they noticed first, few mention the leopard immediately. Attention is captured by motion, contrast shifts, or sound cues implied by the scene. The animal remains present, but it is not prioritized. This pattern repeats even when viewers know a leopard is somewhere in the frame. B. Inconsistent interpretation. Some observers report seeing the leopard only after being told where to look. Others insist they noticed it early but cannot describe its posture or exact position. A few focus on surrounding activity and miss the animal entirely until prompted. Interpretation varies not because the leopard changes, but because attention is allocated elsewhere. Presence does not guarantee priority. See? Perceptual constraint. Attention is selective. Visual systems do not process every element of a scene equally. Priority is given to change, novelty, and threat signals. Static forms that do not demand immediate response are processed at lower levels, even if they are fully visible. In these scenes, the leopard competes with environmental noise, moving foliage, shifting light, and uneven terrain generate continuous, low-level stimuli. The animal's stillness produces no competing signal. As a result, attention drifts. This is not inattentiveness. It is efficiency. D. Reframed understanding. The failure to notice the leopard promptly reflects how attention filters information. The animal does not evade sight, it simply fails to interrupt competing stimuli. Recognition arrives only when attention is redirected, often deliberately. Understanding this reveals a crucial distinction. Visibility and attentional priority are not the same. The leopard can be seen without being attended to, present without being foregrounded. This explains why recognition often feels retrospective, noticed only after the moment has passed. When expectation overrides evidence. A. Repeated observation. In multiple viewing sessions, recognition of the leopard is delayed, not by absence of visual information, but by the expectations viewers bring into the scene. Observers often scan landscapes with assumptions about where an animal should appear, at the edges of cover, near movement, or partially concealed. When the leopard occupies an unexpected position, recognition slows. Footage shows the animal standing in open terrain, fully within view, yet overlooked because it does not conform to anticipated patterns. The scene provides the necessary visual data, but interpretation fails to activate. The leopard is present in a location that contradicts expectation. B. Inconsistent interpretation. Some viewers insist the animal must be behind cover, even when it is not. Others search areas of the frame where they believe a leopard would logically appear, ignoring the region where it actually stands. Recognition occurs only after expectations are revised or after movement forces reevaluation. Interpretations diverge not due to ambiguity in the image, but due to conflict between expectation and evidence. The same frame produces certainty once assumptions are dropped. C. Perceptual constraint. Perception is not purely bottom-up. It is guided by predictive models shaped by experience. The brain anticipates certain configurations and prioritizes information that fits those predictions. When evidence conflicts with expectation, it may be discounted or delayed. In wildlife observation, this bias is strong. Predators are expected to hide. When a leopard remains exposed, still, and unaligned with those expectations, perception hesitates. The visual system waits for confirmation that matches its model. This delay persists until either expectations adjust or new cues override prediction. D. Reframed understanding. The misreading here is not visual failure, but cognitive filtering. The leopard is not unseen because it is hidden, but because it violates expectation. Recognition requires the observer to abandon assumptions about where danger or interest should reside. Once expectation is recalibrated, the animal becomes obvious. The delay disappears not because the scene changes, but because interpretation does. This reveals a critical limitation. Observation is shaped as much by belief as by sight. The leopard remains unchanged. The observer's model determines whether it is acknowledged. Resolution, triggered by movement. A. Repeated observation. Across numerous recordings, recognition of the leopard becomes immediate the moment it moves. A shift of weight, a turn of the head, a single step forward. These minimal actions abruptly transform uncertainty into clarity. The animal that moments earlier felt ambiguous now registers unmistakably as present, positioned, and real. Importantly, the movement does not reveal new parts of the body. It does not significantly change lighting or background. What changes is not the amount of information available, but the type of information introduced. The leopard is the same before and after movement. Recognition is not. B. Inconsistent interpretation. Observers often describe this moment as the leopard appearing, despite acknowledging later that it was visible beforehand. Others insist they knew the animal was there but could not describe it until movement occurred. Some reinterpret earlier frames retroactively, surprised by how obvious the animal seems. Once recognition has been established, interpretation collapses into certainty almost instantly. The hesitation that dominated earlier observation disappears without gradual transition. C. Perceptual constraint. Movement is a dominant signal in visual processing. It binds features, confirms object boundaries, and restores depth cues. Motion resolves ambiguity by synchronizing multiple perceptual channels, contrast, depth, and attention into a single coherent event. When the leopard moves, the visual system no longer needs to infer form. Motion supplies confirmation. The brain stops questioning whether fragments belong together and accepts them as one object. This explains why recognition feels sudden rather than progressive. Movement acts as a trigger, not an enhancement. D. Reframed understanding. The critical insight is that recognition depends less on visibility than on confirmation. The leopard does not need to hide to delay detection. It only needs to withhold the signal that perception trusts most. Understanding this reframes earlier uncertainty. The delay was not caused by insufficient visual data, but by the absence of a decisive trigger. Once that trigger appears, perception resolves instantly. The leopard never entered the scene. It only entered certainty. Certainty as a retrospective illusion. A. Repeated observation. After recognition finally occurs, observers often revisit earlier moments in the footage with a sense of confidence that did not exist before. The leopard now appears obvious. Its outline seems clear. Its position feels undeniable. Viewers point to frames from the beginning and question how it was ever missed. This reaction is consistent. Once certainty is achieved, the earlier ambiguity is rewritten in memory. The leopard appears as if it had always been clearly perceived, even though recognition arrived late. The animal has not changed. The record has not changed. Only the observer's interpretation of the past has. B. Inconsistent interpretation. When observers are asked to mark the moment they first recognize the leopard, responses vary widely. Some choose early frames, others select later ones. A few revise their answers after rewatching, shifting recognition backward in time. Interpretation becomes unstable not only in the present, but in retrospect. Certainty reshapes memory, smoothing over hesitation and doubt. What was once ambiguous is reclassified as obvious. C. Perceptual constraint. This effect arises from how perception and memory interact. Once the brain commits to an interpretation, it reinforces that interpretation across the entire sequence. Earlier uncertainty is discounted, replaced by a coherent narrative of recognition. The visual system favors continuity. It prefers to believe that understanding was present all along. As a result, the moment of hesitation disappears from awareness, even though it shaped the entire process of recognition. This creates an illusion of immediacy. Seeing feels instantaneous, when in reality, it was delayed. D. Reframed understanding. The final insight is not about the leopard, but about certainty itself. Recognition does not arrive as a gradual accumulation of evidence. It arrives as a commitment, and once made, it rewrites perception backward. The leopard was never unclear because it was hidden. It was unclear because understanding lagged behind presence. What feels like obvious visibility is often the product of hindsight. And in that gap between presence and certainty, observation quietly fails. Human observers and tools. Human observers are not the only ones affected by perceptual limits. Recording devices, often treated as neutral witnesses, introduce their own distortions, camera traps, long lenses, and compressed video formats do not simply capture reality, they translate it, filtering information through technical constraints that mirror and sometimes amplify human misinterpretation. Camera traps are positioned based on expectation. They face trails, clearings, or presumed movement paths. When a leopard remains still outside these anticipated zones, it may be recorded incidentally rather than intentionally framed. The animal appears at the edge of composition, partially centered, or visually flattened by distance. Presence is documented, but context is weakened. Long lenses compress depth. They reduce the separation between foreground and background, making spatial relationships harder to read. A leopard filmed at distance can appear pressed against its surroundings, its body lacking clear depth cues. What the eye might resolve in person becomes ambiguous on screen, reinforcing the same uncertainty described earlier. Video compression further alters perception. Subtle gradients of light and texture are simplified or lost, particularly in low-contrast environments. The leopard remains visible, but the fine details that support shape recognition are diminished. Observers reviewing the footage experience hesitation not because the animal is absent, but because the signal has been reduced. Even frame rate matters. Slow or intermittent recording can miss the micro-movements that would otherwise trigger recognition. A single step, a slight shift of posture signals that resolve ambiguity in real time may never appear in the captured sequence. The leopard stays within the frame, but certainty never arrives. These tools do not fail uniquely. They replicate the same limitations that shape human observation: reliance on motion, contrast, and expectation. Technology does not eliminate perceptual gaps, it standardizes them. The result is a layered uncertainty. Human observers interpret footage shaped by devices that already struggle to resolve presence into understanding. The leopard becomes a fixed point in a chain of imperfect observation, reminding us that documentation is not the same as clarity. Why complete understanding remains limited. Even when perceptual limits are identified, understanding does not become complete. Awareness of error does not eliminate it. The constraints shaping observation are not flaws that can be corrected, but conditions that persist regardless of experience or technology. Human perception evolved to prioritize survival, not accuracy. It favors speed over precision, prediction over neutrality. These priorities shape how scenes are processed, which signals are amplified, and which are ignored. In complex environments, this bias cannot be removed, it can only be recognized. Environmental factors reinforce these limits. Light changes continuously. Backgrounds remain dynamic. Terrain introduces scale ambiguity. No single vantage point provides full resolution. Each observation captures only a partial configuration of cues, never the whole. Technology does not resolve this incompleteness. Cameras record what they are pointed at, not what matters. Compression simplifies complexity. Frame selection omits transitional information. Even high-resolution footage cannot replicate depth, context, or attention as they occur in real time. The leopard, as a constant presence, exposes these limits precisely because it does not behave in ways that simplify interpretation. It remains still. It occupies uncertain depth. It violates expectation. In doing so, it reveals how dependent understanding is on assumptions that often go unnoticed. Complete clarity would require conditions that do not exist: stable light, unambiguous context, unbiased attention, and continuous observation from every angle. In nature, such conditions are unattainable. What remains, then, is not ignorance, but partial understanding. Observation produces fragments. Interpretation assembles them imperfectly. The gap between presence and certainty cannot be closed, only acknowledged. This is not a failure of effort. It is a boundary of perception. The leopard never left the frame. It did not change its behavior, alter its position, or withdraw from view. What shifted was interpretation, how presence was translated into certainty. Observation felt complete only after recognition arrived, even though the animal had been visible all along. This gap between seeing and understanding is not unique to this moment or to this species. It reflects a broader condition of perception. What we notice, what we miss, and what we believe we understood from the start are shaped by limits that rarely announce themselves. In nature, many things remain visible without being fully recognized, not because they are hidden, but because perception is selective, predictive, and incomplete. If understanding depends not only on what is present, but on how it is processed, what else might we be failing to truly see?